So it says, just as we have real factors of quadratic expressions, so too do we can have complex factors of quadratic expressions. These factors can be found in ways similar to finding real factors. So we're going to use the same way we've done things in the past, only we're going to apply it for complex numbers. And remember, complex numbers, complex factors, they have an I in them. So when you hear complex, think I, think imaginary numbers, that's what that is. All right, the concept is if you find the solutions of a quadratic equation, it is not complicated to put the equation in factored form. So anytime you factor something, you can put it into, or I'm sorry, anytime you find the solutions to something, you can put it in factored form. So that's essentially what we're going to do. We're going to solve a certain expression, and then we're going to put it in factored form from there. Okay, so let's look at this first one here. This one should be a review, x squared minus 1. But I'm going to show you a way that I would prefer you to solve this because it makes it easier for the new stuff we're going over. So it says factor the following. Okay, create a factored form of this equation right here. So to figure out the factored form, all you have to do, and it's going to be the exact same steps for the complex factors, is you set this equal to 0 and you solve. So we're going to add 1 to both sides. So then this is going to cancel, and you're left with x squared is equal to 1. Okay. Square root both sides. And you're left with x is equal to plus or minus 1. Those are the solutions, but what you can do is you can use those solutions to write it in factored form. Okay, so that's not the answer. The answer would be to write it as x minus the positive 1, and then x minus the negative 1. Okay, this answer right here is broken up into positive 1 and negative 1. So what you do is you just subtract both of those, and then here's your final answer. Obviously, that's not simplified all the way because you can do a plus plus here, and you end up with x minus 1 times x plus 1. That's the final answer. Now, if you notice, this is not complex. There's no i's in this because I'm starting with just a basic example first. We're eventually going to do ones where it involves i's. So this should be a review. You could also have done difference of squares on this to solve for it, but you can't really do difference of squares when, well, you could, I guess, but it's not as easy when you have stuff that has complex solutions like part B here. Okay. Are there any questions on what I did here? This should have all been covered in intermediate already. Okay. So now we're going to move on to the new part. Let me erase this here. Okay, so for this one, it's going to end up with a complex solution, and we have to do a complex factoring for it. So it's going to be the same steps, though. So if you're one of those people that like step 1 is to set it equal to 0 and solve. So I set it equal to 0. And now I'm going to solve it. So I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides. All right, I'm going to zoom in too, so we're just focused on one thing here. There we go. So the positive 1 and the negative 1 cancel. Okay, so you're left with negative 1, or I'm sorry, x squared here and negative 1 over here. 0 minus 1 is negative 1. So I wrote that in there. Okay, the next step is to square root both sides. So square root, caboot, and you end up with plus or minus the square root of negative 1. Well, what's the square root of negative 1 equal to? I, thank you. So it's plus or minus I is your answer for this. I'm going to rewrite it down here, though. X is equal to plus or minus I. By the way, you do not need to write these lines like that. I just like to do it to keep organized. Some people do it, some people don't. It doesn't really matter. Now, we're not done because that's the solution, but we need to write it in factored form. So you need to write x minus the positive I and x minus the negative I. Okay, and then that's going to be a plus, and you end up with x minus I times x plus I. This is your final answer right here. Okay, and I kind of want you to compare that to part A. Okay, one has complex solutions, one has real solutions. Again, I know I say this all the time. It's just part A is what you've done already. That was partly part of intermediate algebra. And then the new stuff is just the extension of that with complex numbers. If you think this is easy, great. If you think it's hard, I'm assuming that you also think the original part is hard too, so you might just need a little bit of review on the intermediate algebra stuff. Okay. So when it says to factor it, make sure you factor it. Don't write the solutions. You have to actually factor it. This highlighted part right here is the factored part, and then this part's just the solution. We don't want that. That's not the answer. Okay. Now what I want to do is I just want to show you how to check your work on this. The easiest way to check your work on this is to like grid it out, essentially. So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to do x plus I times x minus I, and we're just going to basically fill this in. Let's do green here. So it's going to be x squared, it's going to be ix, it's going to be negative ix, and then negative I squared. Now what's cool about this is this and this cancel out, so you're left with x squared minus I squared. Someone tell me what I squared is?
1.
Close. Negative 1. So now it's going to be x squared minus negative 1, because I squared is equal to negative 1. Let's do this color. So you end up with a plus, and look, you end up exactly where you started. Okay, that's not the answer, it's just me checking my work. But if you notice, x squared plus 1 is where the problem started originally. So if you wanted to, you can check your work on this by throwing it in a grid and working it out. Any questions? That's literally it. That's all you do for all of these. Okay, we'll do the last one as practice. I guess there's another one down there too, but we'll do this one together. So again, first step, find the solution. So set it equal to 0 to solve this, to find the solutions. Okay. Now, to find the solutions on this one, it's not as simple as part B, because with part B, you could just subtract the 1 over. What are we going to need to solve this? What formula do we use? Quadratic, boom, thank you. So it's going to be x is equal to negative b, which our b is 1 in this case, so it's going to be negative 1, plus or minus the square root of b squared, which is just 1 squared. So that's 1, excuse me. Minus 4 times AC. A is 1 and C is 1. Square root all of that. And then we're going to divide it by 2 times A. A is 1, so we're just dividing this by 2. Okay, these ones kind of just cancel out. They're not really needed. So you're left with x is equal to negative 1 plus or minus the square root of negative 3 all over 2. But you can't have the square root of a negative. Okay, so if I pull that negative out from that root 3, essentially what does that become? I, very good. So now you end up with negative 1 plus or minus I root 3 divided by 2. All right, again, this is not your answer. If it said to solve it, that's your answer, but the problem says to factor it. So what we need to do is put this in factored form. So it's going to be x minus the plus version of this. Oops, that's a 3. That's the plus version because we're using the plus here. And then it's going to be x minus version, the subtracted version. And that's your final answer. And they always come in pairs like that, where one's a plus and one's a minus. So every single time you see them, it's going to always do that. All right, so on your own, I want you to factor this thing right here. I'm going to slowly start working the problem out, but I do want you to have a little bit of practice on your own. It's okay if you make a mistake, just as long as you learn from it. Step 1, set it equal to 0. Step 2, find the solutions. Step 3, x minus each of the solutions. So 3 steps. Set it equal to 0, find the solutions, and then just do x minus each of the solutions. And it's always minus. Always, always. Get it right. I'm sorry. I forgot to mention that you can do it either way. We kind of talked about it the other day. But if you wanted to, you could divide the top and the bottom by 4. So that means, hold on. So that means this would be equal to 4 plus or minus 3i all over 2. And you could do, as your answer, x minus 4 plus 3i over 2. Brackets on this. And then the same thing again, only the minus version of it, the minus flavor. Something like this. You don't really need parentheses there. I don't know why I did that. But anyway, that's the same answer. You'd still get full credit.